one, but
There's a very important thing as we have Saint-Domingue becomes Haiti. Comes Haiti. So when Mintz is referring to Saint-Domingue, that's when it was a French colony. Now, Mintz is sometimes a very understated writer. Like sometimes he's hard to understand because he was such a gentleman. He was such an understated person. And so early on, he calls Haiti Western Hemisphere's second sovereign state. I know, puzzling, right? Because what the heck is he talking about? First of all, we have to know, hey, this should be on the map quiz. We have to know where the Western Hemisphere is. What the heck is the Western Hemisphere? The Western Hemisphere. Marcus. Yeah, like what places would that be? Yeah, I mean, basically the Western Hemisphere is the Americas, right? It's the Americas. So Western Hemisphere is the Americas. First, we have to know that. And then second sovereign state, what the heck is he talking about? What was the first sovereign state in the Western Hemisphere? He's too subtle. Huh? The United States, correct, yes. It was the first sovereign state. So Haiti is the second sovereign state, which is a big deal, actually, right? It being the second sovereign state after the United States. I would put it like this, right? This is my way of phrasing it. After the United States, it's the first independent country in the Americas, which is a pretty big deal. Like the first after the United States, you have the United States, which is a big deal, obviously, but we know about that, right? Everybody knows about the United States. But if I were to ask you what was the second sovereign state in the Western Hemisphere, very few of you probably would have said Haiti, right? In fact, I don't know what you would have said, but I don't know what I would have said. This is just a fact that I have to keep relearning because it's been hidden from us. So this is Mintz being subtle, but it's a pretty big deal. Later on, he's a little, I think, stronger. I think sometimes his writing is subtle, but just really powerful. The way Saint-Domingue became Haiti was in the fires of revolution. And so, Amy, you were talking about why he didn't talk so much about the emancipation, for example, of the Haitians. Well, because they emancipated themselves. They didn't just get emancipation, they burned stuff down, killed people, and the only instance where there were many rebellions, many revolts, many revolutions, but it's the only one in which slaves rose up and successfully wrested the nation itself, took control of the whole place from those who owned their flesh. Ooh, yeah, now that's some more powerful writing for you, right? That's some powerful stuff. So in the Haitian Revolution, and this is a sort of a revolutionary period, and it's like I said, the first independent country outside of the United States in the Americas and the Western Hemisphere. In some places, as we saw in Jamaica, you have emancipation, technical freedom, but you don't have independence until much later on. In some places, you have independence without emancipation. Does anybody know any revolutions in which independence was gained, but no emancipation was, Marcus? Yeah, us, right? Or the United States. When I say us, let's just assume we're all here. I know that's a bad assumption, but here we are, right? We're in this country. So we'll just say us. Yeah, us, the US the US was a place where, famously, of course, there was a revolution that was fought, and people fought on both sides of that. But at the end of it, people didn't always get what they came for. So this was a pretty big deal as a revolution, because it is not only the only one, it's the only one of its time in which you have both independence and emancipation simultaneously. So it's a successful national slave revolution. Mintz doesn't, I don't think Mintz talks about this, but it's an interesting part of our thing to think about, because we've been thinking about South America, and we read about Simón Bolívar, the liberator of South America, the George Washington of South America, liberated Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and then marches into Bolivia as well, as you remember, and they start firing off the cannons. Interestingly, when he was losing, he was actually driven by the Spaniards out of South America, and he and some of his best people, his army, fled to Haiti, where they received refuge and they received help. And the Haitians said, "You're doing great, go back. But when you liberate South America, free the enslaved persons there." And he actually did it. One of the few instances in which he promised to do that, and he did it. Now, certainly the demographics were not the same in South America, as we've read about, as in the Caribbean. So there were not as many enslaved persons, but it was an interesting promise, and he basically carried it out. The Haitian Revolution was also very important in something you may have read about or heard about in history, the Louisiana Purchase. Wait, has anybody heard about that? Did you have to read about this in school? Yeah, what was it? Yeah, it wasn't just that little state of Louisiana. It's like this huge amount of land. Sold it off for nothing. Wait, who sold it to us? The French, Napoleon, in fact, right? Sold it to Thomas Jefferson for a pittance, all that land. And what do you learn about that? And it was a dumb decision on Napoleon's part, right? Yeah, that's what we always learn, is it's dumb. And you learn that Thomas Jefferson was sitting there like, "Oh, I don't know if I want all this land." Did he tell you that? I guess that's disappeared. I'm sure, though, they did not tell you how important the Haitian Revolution was in the Louisiana Purchase. Did they? No. Nobody knows this. The reason Napoleon wanted to sell that land, or was convinced to sell that land, and he sold it on the cheap, was because what he really wanted was the riches and money and sugar and all the stuff from Haiti. That was the real prize. Once the Haitian Revolution had happened, and once he sent an army there that the Haitians then drove into the sea again, he was like, fuck it. I got my wars in Europe to fight. I need money. I don't want to deal with those Americans anymore. Americans, he meant all the people. I'm just selling it. Sell it off. Mintz tells us this on pages 96 and 97. Not as dramatically as I just did, but he's a subtle guy. Didn't say these kinds of words. The Haitian Revolution, page 96, played some part in Napoleon's decision after Leclerc's defeat and death. Oh yeah, that's the guy that Napoleon sent there to re-enslave the Haitians, to negotiate the Louisiana Purchase. He says it might have happened anyway, but he didn't want to defend it. The purchase facilitated the consolidation of a continental United States, a process helped along by the revolutionaries of Haiti, a favor for which no one has ever thanked them. That's for sure. Never thanked them. Regina, what happened? Didn't learn about this in school? No, nothing. Didn't come up. Oh my gosh. This is the first time you're hearing about it. You don't learn anything about Haiti. If you think about Haiti, you just think, yeah, Creole and poverty and an earthquake or something and bad elementary school. And in his third grade picture, not that there's anything wrong with this, but he wanted a big American flag behind him as the background. And now he looks at that and he's like, I don't know what happened. He's like, they just really teach you to be patriotic there. And it's like, there's actually nothing wrong with that, right? You should like your country. You should like the country that you have. There's no reason not to learn this. There's no reason not to thank the Haitians for their role in the Louisiana Purchase. Unfortunately, Liam and Kaylee and Megan are going to change all that when they're teaching the children of America, right? What age group are you teaching? Huh? Oh, you need this. Huh? Kindergarten. That's a little tougher. We still got to be. Yeah, right. Yeah. Liam, where are you going? High school. Is anybody else teaching besides those three? You don't have to be in education. Nobody else is going to save the youth of America. Well, I eventually will teach college, but not. That's the youth of America too. I will say that in Global 10A, my son is now in sophomore in Oneonta High School, and they actually did cover the Haitian Revolution as part of the Age of Revolution. So, you know, I got on him about it too. What is one of the things that's interesting about this, and I will make no comment on Marcus's overall point. You can take it or leave it. He said it, I didn't. But one of the things that is interesting about this is that, you ever heard that phrase that the winners write history? As the history is written by the winners. And so then everybody's like, yeah, because they lost, so they didn't get their perspective in there because the more powerful people write history. This is an interesting case because they won the revolution. They won it. They were the winners. And they completely got erased from the history. That is, they were forgotten even at the time. And Mintz cites a person, Michel Rolfe Trouillot, who was in some ways a Haitian anthropologist and sort of co-professor. We'll hear more about him because he was also the professor of Yarimar Bonilla, who we're going into. But Trouillot basically claims that in some ways, and Mintz is drawing on this, that the Haitian Revolution was unthinkable at the time. That in some ways, people could not admit that, enslaved descendants of Africans were able to do this. And so it was something that was like beyond the bounds, perhaps even of the people themselves as they were doing it. They probably didn't sort of intend to become an independent country when they were going through the revolution. And so in some ways it was outside the boundaries of what even was thought to be possible. And certainly for the people around it, it was terrifying. Let us say that you were a person, a slave owner in Louisiana at the time. What are you going to start thinking? Yeah, I mean, hey, you don't want them to know about this. You want to clamp down on things, man. You want to keep this either under wraps, or you want to ratchet up the oppression. It was a world-shaking event, and they basically made Haiti pay for it. Well, literally, the French charged them in order to buy their own country. So, I mean, this is, like I said, an amazing event, and we're going to watch a film later that will sort of show us a little bit more about the how part. But there's some interesting passages in here which we'll anticipate. Like I said, when we see this in the film, hopefully will become, it's always easier to see people than it is to just, how do you say that? Oh my goodness, okay. What does that mean? People of color, right? The people of color. David, who the heck are these people? Not white enough to be considered French. So yeah, the people of color who become extremely important in Saint-Domingue. There's also what the French put out as the, Louis XIV's Code Noir, Black Code, literally. But I mean, which is limiting. It's definitely limiting to the people that it covers. But on page 102, it says the code declared that slaves, once freed, had rights nearly the same as those of French citizens. They could own land, travel freely, testify in a court of law and against whites, marry freely, and own slaves. Whoa. And then if you go to page 105, and there's some debate about how much exactly the Hens de couleur owned, but if you go to page 105, owned 1/3 of the colony's plantations, 1/4 of the slaves, and 1/4 of the real estate property. Or maybe it was only 20% of the slaves, but still, that's pretty incredible, right? So, let's put it this way. That is, of the slightly more than 450,000 slaves in the colony, between 90,000 and 110,000 were owned by non-white slaveholders. And so what Mintz is saying here is that, well, he basically says this, without the bitter and divisive struggle between the whites and the free people of color. Oh, by the way, in the old days, people said colored, right, as a term. Today, it's okay to say people of color, because that's been kind of adopted. You don't want to say, that's a very old-fashioned term. And the free people of color, the revolution would probably not have succeeded. So the power that these people had in their sort of being able to have this much wealth control, plantations within the French colonial system was pretty interesting and kind of unique. And so Mintz goes in to say that, how did the people of color come about? In both Jamaica and in Saint-Domingue, you saw this sort of predatory sexual behavior of the planter class. In many cases, and as Mintz told us earlier, and let's just be blunt about it, they routinely raped their female slaves. So that was just something that they believed that maybe they didn't believe it, but they did it. And what he says is that really there was the same thing going on in Saint-Domingue. The planters, the white planters, were doing the same thing. But interestingly, as Mintz said, when it came to Jamaica, he writes that race almost always or usually trumped blood. What he means by that is people would deny or limit the rights. The men would limit the rights or deny legitimacy of their own biological children. Race, being white or not of color, was more important than the kinds of kin and social relationships that had been put into place. And so in Jamaica, the people of color did not have the same rights. They did not have the same, did not rise to the same status. And what he says about Saint-Domingue, which is really interesting, is that having these relationships sometimes was more important than the sort of racial separation. And so if you read on page 109, why were the cases so different? Jamaica Saint-Domingue. Fundamentally, I think it was because the Saint-Domingue sugar planters during the expanding decades of the sugar boom there seemed much readier to recognize and protect and often to legitimize by marriage their mixed race children. They would actually get married and give them inheritances and legitimize them. Without the readiness of white French males to free and marry the slave mothers who bore their children, to protect and educate those children, and to make them their rightful heirs, this is where my French is messing me up. One more time, Amy. How do you say this? The top one. There we go. Would have more closely resembled the people like them in Jamaica. So again, this is not to say that the French were better or less oppressive, but there was a social code or a social difference there that came up. So, wait a second. Where did Liam flee to? Just as he's about to be picked on. He must have known, he must have seen this was coming up. Liam's quote was a great quote around page 109. So what the Mintz is saying here is contemporary with the mounting pressure for new legal constraints on the free colored in Saint-Domingue, the mid-18th century, I guess around the 1750s, 1760s there, also saw more laws enacted to control the free colored in Jamaica. So in both places, you have these laws. This is before the revolution, these laws being enacted. Unfortunately, I mean, what we learn about Haiti is what is actually true about Haiti. And in some ways, the story of the glorious Haitian Revolution is sad because after that, the country, it's hard to run a revolution, and the country was reduced to ashes. They did not reinstitute the wealth generation that had been put in place. And that there were various reasons that continues. As I talked about, it was seen as a threat to other places that were that held slaves, and so you know, the United States, many countries refused to recognize Haitian independence. I think the French, I think one of the reasons the Haitians paid or put themselves into a huge debt with the French was to get recognition from the Catholic Church. They were basically excommunicated for a while until they were re-recognized. But they were seen as, this sort of pariah state that was a problem for other places. And the revolution and the ensuing governments did not ever create a kind of national infrastructure, a system in which people would have roads and transportation, as we saw in Jamaica, right? That there was no impulse from the national government to educate people or to make them into citizens. As in Jamaica, though, there is an extremely robust peasant market system. So the farmers that would then put their stuff into the market, into the marketplaces, and sell it throughout the country. Mintz, that's what he went to Haiti to study, was their market system, which he said was maybe one of the only truly kind of national institutions. And interestingly, it was like in Jamaica, the marketing, at least the business end of things, was almost entirely run by women who manipulated a lot of capital and were seen as being able to be independent and to go on trips outside of their home and be able to do all the business of marketing throughout the country. So the Haitian markets were something that Mintz studied. They were very sort of close to his heart. Alicia pulled out a nice quote from the end of this chapter about some of the Haitian market practices. No. By the way, if you really need to know what Bauer said, how would you find him? Yeah, you have to go to the end of the book. I mean, that's the thing. We haven't done this. I haven't made you do it, but you know, if you write a paper and you do a parenthetical cite like this, then at the end of the book, you have to do your references. And so I go in there and I find Bauer, P.T. Bauer, and there he is, 1954, West African Trade, a study of competition, oligopoly, and monopoly in a changing economy. And then I go down to the library and I read Bauer's book, get all excited about Bauer. Nah, you'll never do that. So I'll tell you one story that Mintz told me about Bauer, about this practice. Bauer went into a West African market and there was a guy there and he was selling oil. He was selling a cup of oil. He was selling a cup of oil for $10. I mean, for $1. He was selling a cup of oil for $1. I'm just making up numbers here. I have no idea how much it was. It was a cup of oil for $1. But Bauer looks at this and he's like, well, how much oil do you have in there? Anyway, it turned out that he'd bought this big jug of oil for $10, but the jug only had 10 cups in it. So he was selling the cup. You see what I'm saying? He was selling it for exactly how much he was going to get out of it. And Bauer says, where's your profit, man? And the guy held up the jug and he smiled, said, that's the profit. Marcus is looking at me like it's crazy. What was he saying, Marcus? No, he's walking off with the jug. That's the profit. Once he sold the oil, 1 cup at a time, he's got the jug. That's his margin. Well, yeah, that was back when jugs meant something, man. You didn't just throw them into the recycling bin. That was when jugs were worth something. I don't know if they were worth, but they were worth a little bit, right? That was his profit. So this is it's kind of like the gold coasting, right? You've bought something, you have to sell it really fast for a low profit margin. Such transoceanic similarities argue for a common cultural heritage. So some people have talked about the similarities between West African markets and Haitian markets or Jamaican markets. Now, but here's the crucial part. But in at least some cases, it may be structurally parallel economic situations producing like solutions rather than a shared tradition. What is Mintz telling us there? Think about that, jug. If you're in a low profit environment, right? Like structurally parallel economic situations, low profit environment, you're trying to make a little bit fast, but only a little bit, produces like solutions. So what he's saying is it might not be some sort of shared cultural tradition. It's just the economics of it, which are making this thing work in a similar way. And so it looks the same, but it's not necessarily a sort of, you didn't have to go back culturally to find this. It's just what happens to people when they're selling things for a little bit of money. How are we doing? Oh, we're fine. Might have to tell you one more story, but not yet. Yeah, maybe we do need one more story. There's a story that Mintz tells us here about the marketing on the page before. And he told us to this in class. He used to go in and sit with the women, the Haitian women who were doing the marketing. And he used to watch as, like, you know, they'd be selling here. Red beans. So they're selling red beans. And he'd come in and nobody would know exactly what the price is. And he'd say, well, how much are you going to sell it for? And they said, we're going to let the market tell us the price. And sure enough, they'd all be sitting there with the red beans, and a buyer would come down the line and they'd be like, okay, $4, wouldn't buy. They'd drop the price a little bit, and that would set the price. And then everybody's selling at $3.50, as he says here. And so he once asked the person he was with, he said, well, what if somebody comes in and sits down and starts selling the same beans for $3? What are you going to do? And then he looked at us. We were all like you. We were trying to take notes and be smart. And he looked at us and he said, what did she say? I said, oh, I don't know. He said, she said was, how much does she have? Mintz said, I would have given her a PhD on the spot if I could have. Because in that instance, she knew exactly what was going on. She said, if she's only got a little, we'll let her sell and she goes away. If she's got a lot, we buy her out or face too much competition. And so he says here that Nana knew about oligopsony, all right, as well as about capital, long-term supply costs, zero opportunity costs, marginal utility, and arbitrage. But she and her sisters had no need of Western terminology. So, yeah. Similar, structurally parallel economic situations. All right. Yeah, now it's a great quote. I mean, he's basically saying that every time they wanted to do something or get something or buy some soap, get a little tax. And so the people on the top of the government, and this is not, this is not just colonialism, this is in many parts of the world, is the people at the top are trying to suck out a little bit from a little bit. And so at the end of this chapter, Mintz says that, both the Jamaican and the Haitian people are a testament to the courage and creativity of those millions who were dragged from their hearths, their homes, mostly to awful suffering, humiliation, early deaths in what may have been the single most terrible demographic event in history. But from that, we have, a successful slave revolution, successful reconstitution as small farmers, as small free farmers, but without any help from the government or to do what they did. So I say this as a way of thinking about, it reminded me of the film we just watched, Even the Rain. And, you had Bolivia. Once it was this place with the richest mountain in the world, the silver, all the stuff. And now if you look up what is the poorest country in South America, at least by GDP per population, as we saw in the film, there it is, poor Bolivia. And Haiti, which was once sort of the gem in the crown of French colonialism, the place that Napoleon wanted to keep enslaved and keep all the riches coming, the site of a successful revolution. You look, probably the poorest country in the whole Western Hemisphere, certainly the poorest country in the Caribbean. So this is, these are some hard realities to think about when we think about what happened in Latin America, is the places that seem to be supplying all the good stuff, the silver, the sugar, the stuff that we most consider to be important, have ended up in this situation. They also, both of these places have a distinctive culture of protest. And as you saw in the film, Even the Rain, it's a pretty dramatic protest that people sort of become accustomed to, I guess I would say, or it might be because you need to do it because of the oppression you're facing. But I was really struck that in many places in Latin America, there's a chant that they have, which is, the people united will never be defeated, or la gente unida jamás será vencido. And it's very common to hear this when you're doing a protest, right? But if you remember, the Bolivian chant was like, rifles and bullets will never stop the people. It's like took it up a notch, that was like pretty huge. And they also had some nice dynamite with them to start, which is true. In our book on Potosi, at the very end, he talks about the Bolivian miners actually do a lot use dynamite in their protests to wake people up and get everyone's attention. So certainly the film has its basis in real life, even if the ending was quite hard to believe or imagine. But I also say these things because we're going into Guadeloupe, which is the next book we're going to be reading. And in some ways, this Guadeloupe also has its own culture of protest, which we'll be talking about, and its own relationship to sovereignty, which is that it's still a part of France. It's not independent from France at all. And so it's just sort of interesting to compare to these kinds of places that are independent and have gone. Now, most of us, I said, don't worry so much about Puerto Rico, but we need to talk a little bit about Puerto Rico here. In Puerto Rico, in this chapter, one of the interesting things is that in Puerto Rico, there was a very low percentage of enslaved Africans. So the demographic were not at all the same as in Jamaica and Haiti. In Saint-Domingue, there were not that many. The Spanish, yes, they participated in slavery and enslavement of Native Americans and of Africans, but not usually at the extent of these sugar-producing places in the Caribbean. Mintz says it's one of the oldest colonies, of course. It's one of the first European colonies, one of the first Spanish colonies, but it's also one of the newest colonies in the sense that it is now a territory of the United States, and the people of Puerto Rico are U.S. citizens. You can also go there without having to show your U.S. passport. You just need a driver's license. But it's a constrained citizenship. You don't get to vote in presidential elections or have representation in Congress. It's a compromised situation. In Puerto Rico, it's unlike Jamaica and Saint-Domingue. It turns out that the plantation owners actually were able to, it's one of the only places where they actually got the white people to work and alongside enslaved people on the plantations they did have. So it became an interesting labor situation, and it led to some quite different outcomes than happened in both Jamaica and Haiti. There's also some interesting gender stuff going on. Able to work, they were able to be unchaperoned, have to be with them, and outside of the home and in distant towns. And then Mintz asks one of the guys, he says, in Haiti, women go off for like 2 or 3 days and like sell in the markets. Guy says, no way. That woman's not back at home before 4 o'clock. I'm locking the door. So it's interesting because if you compare what happened to Puerto Rico to what happened in Haiti, you have fierce women independence, economic independence, running a whole market system in Haiti. You have an island just across the way, Puerto Rico, where this only happens really late on. So, Kaylee, if you want to be super brilliant in this, you compare what happened in Puerto Rico to what's happening in Haiti, and then you say, why would this be different, by the way? What might account for this difference? It's a hard question. It's a difficult question to answer. It has to do probably with the non-independence of Puerto Rico and its continued being part of a Spanish colonial system, right? And that was still in place and intact and had all these ideas about gender and being able to, where the place of what a woman should be and how that should work. So, yeah, it's a really difficult question, but that's kind of the interesting comparison there. But still good.